So this is how I go about sharpening my swords. It is actually a method inspired by Tom on SBG. It involves a belt sander and a combination of high grit belts and a leather strop. And it works on both European blades and Japanese blades. It can be one of the fastest and easiest ways to put a pretty good edge on a sword, but it can also be one of the fastest and easiest ways to screw up your sword. So I would even advise doing most of the groundwork at the very, very lower grits by hand and only using the leather strop for, or the belt sander, excuse me, for some of the finer honing work. That's why I'm already starting at fairly high grit. I mean, if you're really good at it, you can use it to establish the edge bevel if you want, but I wouldn't recommend that for the first time using it. In fact, actually, I wouldn't even recommend using a sword at all for your first time using it. Get a practice blade that you don't care about or something like that. Anyway, I just got some new belts in. I've never used these particular belts before. These are from Micro Mesh, but they look pretty good, so I'm excited to find out how they'll do. Okay, I'm going to start out with this belt. It is the lowest grit belt that I bought, which is a 240 MX. It's about 25 micron belt, so we're looking at between, on the US scale, between 400 and 500 grit. It's a good starting place to begin the honing. It's not going to cut aggressively enough to actually establish any new bevels. You'd want something more like 280 grit, something like that. But the 25 micron is going to take that edge, and it's going to make both sides of the edge meet if they have not already, and it's going to establish a good wire edge. Now, as for the angle, that's kind of a personal thing, but basically what I'm going for here is I want a good sharp edge, but I also want it to be a strong edge. Now, since the belt is going to give it kind of a natural appleseed edge, since it's going to have some slack that's going to create a curved shape, which is what I want, but it's kind of hard to say in degrees the angle that I'm going for, but like right at the very, very edge, I don't know, I'm going for maybe, it's going to be probably something like 30 degrees, something like that, but several things. For one thing, since it doesn't have, it's not going to have a sharp ridge line on the edge bevel. It's still going to be a very sharp edge, and it's going to have a very nice shape to it. And when you do all that properly, you can actually get away with having a relatively fat angle for the edge, and that will give it a lot of resistance to chipping and rolling and even dulling on hard encountered abusive targets, and by abusive I don't mean a tree trunk or anything. By abusive, I mean anything like tatami with a bamboo core or something like that. But it's still going to be sharp enough that it will still cut light targets very easily. So now I'm just going to plug this thing in and establish the wire edge. But one thing I'm loving about this belt, it is not showing any signs of wear. Did 4 passes on it. Actually 8, I do 4 passes per edge, 2 on each side. And the grip is still completely intact. One thing that I'm also noticing, this belt does not cut nearly as aggressively as the other belt. These belts, the grip and the scratch size is equivalent, but it's a lot smoother, a more uniform finish. I'm impressed. It's already feeling a little sharper. Though, to be honest, that's probably just the wire edge forming at this point. it still feels fresh. That's excellent. That's a nice wire edge. Barely even see it. You just feel it curling one way or the other with your finger. I'm not even going to attempt to show it in the camera. It won't pick it up. Very nice. Okay, so this next belt I'm going to be using is their 320 MX, which is it's about a little less than 800 grit. It's between 11 and 12 micron, and feels pretty smooth. Yeah, one thing to always keep in mind when you're trying to decide when to switch belts, you know, when the blade has had enough of one belt, is look for that wire edge. I can't even show the camera. It's just you almost need a magnifying glass to see it. But as you move the blade along the belt, what you're going to see is just a tiny little raggedy spot form along the blade, or along the very edge, just as it's passing over the belt. You're going to see, what's happening is a little bit. What's happening is the belt is bringing the edge together and honing it as much as its grit will allow. And what happens is, as it's sanding one side, it's going to make that side, as it's sanding it, curl over just a little bit, like that. And also when it does that, if you immediately feel this side, you're going to feel just a little bit of a burr. So if I'm honing this side of this edge, I'm going to see as it passes over the belt, you know, let's say here's the belt, right there, just as it's being passed over, I'm going to see that wire edge flop to that side. It's going to get pushed over to this side as just as a little shiny spot on the edge. And then if I take my finger and I pass it over the edge like this, I'm going to feel that little burr of the wire edge on that side. And after a few passes like that, then the edge is honed to the best of that belt's ability. Then I'm ready to move on to the next belt. Okay, so up next I'm going to be using a 10 micron belt here. That's just a little over 1,000 grit. Then I'm going to move on to a 9 micron belt, which is between 10 and 1,200 grit.